Andrew Tate is ruining masculinity as we know it today through his egocentricity, selfishness, and materialism. And if men continue to blindly follow him, the next generation of men will be full of miserable, selfish men. And it will be the end of men as we know it. Here's why. So I hate to be the person to try to take advantage of trendy topics to, just get clicks and all that. But the reason I'm doing this video is because this is an urgent matter. As Andrew Tate is gaining more and more of a following, he is threatening masculinity and he is directing masculinity in a very negative direction, which I'm going to expose in this video here. So the goal of this video is to give a more holistic understanding of what's going on with Andrew Tate, why people are following him, and what is bad about what he is preaching and what he is presenting in his videos. Also, I don't want to only be negative and be the one who attacks someone online just to attack them, but I also want to point out the good things about him, because while he says a lot of outrageous things, among the chaos, there are certain nuggets of information that do make sense and that are actually valid. So we will discern here the good from the bad. Many men actually cannot discern the good from the bad, and they kind of put everything together in a single philosophy that could be negative, and you can see it happening in the manosphere communities nowadays. Now, a huge disclaimer here. The goal of this video is not to start a war against someone else, not to criticize Andrew Tate, not to, to attack him and to sort of bring him down. That's not the goal. The goal is to bring more awareness to some of the issues that he raises. So to invite you to be more of a critical thinker, more of a sort of holistic thinker, and understand what he presents from a more critical standpoint. So this video will be mostly based on the video compilations I've seen on YouTube, some of his interviews, most notably the interview with XQC and the interview with Standout TV YouTube channel where he talks to a woman here. I don't know her name. So those are mostly the main sources of information I'm getting this from. So who is Andrew Tate? Andrew Tate is an American-British kickboxer who rose to fame, became an internet phenomena to his controversial views that he started posting on various social media platforms, and he even got deleted on Twitter because of that. I'm going to put a link to the interviews below if I remember to do so. So you can watch these, because I found like the compilations to be heavily edited. It's better if you look at the interview in full, uncut, so that you have a better understanding of who he is as a person, what his views are, psychology, how he works, and how he uses certain tactics to manipulate other people. So you might understand better if you look at his interviews. So let's get started with, why do people follow Andrew Tate? Why do they follow him? Well, the answer is simple in my opinion. It's because there is a crisis of masculinity right now, where men no longer know how to be men. They're told from, society that being, masculine and aggressive is toxic and that's not good. And on the other side, you have people like in the manosphere and, Andrew Tate who are, preaching extreme things. So men are sort of torn in between the feminist ideals of what men should be and the ideal of the manosphere or whatever other self-improvement gurus are preaching out there. So there's this strange divide. Men who didn't really have an exemplary father figure, for example, or men who just feel lost, right? Maybe they will never admit that consciously. They probably don't know that. And if I were to tell them, yeah, so you follow Andrew Tate because you never had a good father figure, like they'd probably be offended. But in a sense, they don't have a good example of what a man is. So then in their lives, so then they will gravitate towards someone who seems to be charismatic, seems to know what they're talking about. And also I believe the reason why people follow Andrew Tate is because of simple ego backlash from society as a whole. So society has gone one extreme with feminism and being really radical in terms of judging what toxic masculinity is, being masculine as being something toxic, and these sort of shaming words. Now with cancel culture on top of that, now the pendulum had to swing the other side, and the result of that is sort of the explosion, the expression of the repression. So the repression of masculinity, of men trying to set strong boundaries, trying to be themselves, trying to be the leaders, trying to sort of assert their competitive urges and all that, and materialistic needs, it had to explode at some point. And Andrew Tate is the sort of embodiment of this explosion of repression in a sense, where Andrew Tate is so far the other extreme that now he's sort of like a breath of fresh air. And why do people love Andrew Tate? Why do they love him? Well, they love him because he's unfiltered. He doesn't give a shit what other people think. He just says it the way he means it. And it's so bold in a sense that because it is so bold, some people tend to believe it, right? It's sort of this fallacy that the more confident you are about something, the more confident you assert your views, the more likely you are to attract sort of fanboys, fangirls who believe in you just because the way you say something, because you're really decisive and you're really certain about it, more people tend to jump on the bandwagon. You know, this is how salesmen trick you into buying some things that are, you know, scammy or not right. And they've done that for centuries. The oldest trick in the book: appear confident about what you're talking about, and then that will rally people to your cause. The alpha male who's incredibly loud, who just speaks his mind and says outrageous things, you know, in the classroom, whatever, the class clown, whatever you want to call it, okay? This person isn't necessarily more right because they are more loud. In fact, sometimes the quiet kid who stands in the background is more right. He has a better worldview, maybe more holistic worldview. You don't know. But because the loud person, the loud minority is speaking up, this is what you hear instead of the quiet majority. And again, I think people like him because of this sort of, he plays this persona of the fantasy of the sort of broken hero in a sense. The hero who's narcissistic, has certain flaws, but he just succeeds despite those things. He says things that are so outrageous that are funny in a sense, that you don't know whether he's joking or not, but then, you know, if you repost his tweet or his video, whatever, it's like you're making fun of him, you're laughing, or you're sharing that with your friends, you think this is outrageous. It's just this phenomena of feeding the funny in a sense. But here are the issues with Andrew Tate. So the number one issue about him is that he is a master manipulator and deceiver. Similar to Donald Trump, who is a great marketer, great businessman, and I don't want to get political here, but the reason why Donald Trump succeeded is because he is a master manipulator, also a narcissist, and he is great at rallying people to his cause in a sense, using fear-mongering. In a strange sense, Andrew Tate is doing that sort of indirectly, appealing to men's deepest fears of being alone and not being in charge in a relationship, not being in charge of their dating lives. And he plays to these problems, he plays to these issues within men, the loneliness and all of that. He explains how the loneliness of men is deeper than any woman could ever feel, and he plays along this narrative to appeal men, to drag men to his causes in a sense, so that later he can sell you his program, his affiliate program. He can turn you into a follower so that you can no longer think for yourself, you just follow what he tells you to do. He's also a master of the social game. So if you've looked at some of his interviews, you would think, wow, this guy is just stupid. He says random shit that are just outrageous. But in an odd sense, he knows the game that he's playing. He knows that if he says those outrageous things, that he will get more followers, more views, or more reach. In a sense, he'll become more popular. But also, you'll see in his interviews that he uses certain rhetorical devices, and he uses questions. You know, he sort of, to be more persuasive, instead of just answering the person's questions, he's going to ask a question back in a sense. So, for example, he'll explain a certain concept about men in relationship, and then he's going to say, you agree that in a healthy relationship, in general, someone takes the lead. Do you agree with that? And then the interview will say yes. And then everyone in the room, you see, will start nodding their heads, and he'll pile on more things. Oh yeah, would you agree that as a general trend, men are usually the leaders, or the women like a man who can take charge? And then everyone will agree. And then he'll stack on the most ridiculous shit and say like, yeah, well, that's why I'm the fucking boss and I decide what my woman does, and I can go clubbing, she can't go clubbing because that would be disgusting. Whatever, he says all these outrageous things, but he will preemptively say certain things beforehand to get the approval of everyone in the room, everyone who is watching his videos, so that he can just justify all of his selfish acts from his own biased point of view towards those universal principles that most people agree on. He'll use these principles and mold them to his own selfish, egotistical needs. It seems to me that he understands the 48 laws of power by Robert Greene. And he uses these laws, in a sense, unfortunately not to the best of, for the best reason. He uses it for his own selfish reasons. So he knows not to reveal himself too much in interviews. So he'll usually talk about general principles and concepts, as you may have seen in his interview at Standout TV. You can watch it on YouTube with this woman that he's get interviewed by. So you can see that he's sort of stepping away from trying to reveal too much about him, because he knows that every word that he says in a wrong way about his own life could endanger his reputation or endanger his who he is as a person. Also, he knows that by talking those general terms and universal principles, he can appeal to more people in a sense, and he can allow people to fill in the general principles with their own fantasies, their own specifics. Because he never really speaks of, if he speaks of specifics, he speaks mostly of his own experiences, but he's not going to trying to counter his own views, trying to be open to criticism. He's not open to criticism at all if you look at his interviews. So that's a big issue with him. Now let's move on to more issues about Andrew Tate. Another thing that he does is his obvious double standard towards men and women. For example, he says that for a woman to be disloyal, to not be loyal to her man, it was one of the most disgusting thing ever about a woman. He says that. But then when the interviewer asks him about his own views on his own loyalty, how loyal he is to his own woman, he avoids the question, or he will straight out lie. An example of this is on the Standout TV interview. He'll talk and he'll say like, oh yeah, I'm a very loyal man. Why would you question that? I'm very religious. He'll say something like that. And in another interview from another podcast, he'll say, oh yeah, if I sleep with another girl, I'll just explain to my woman, yeah, it's just some random bitch, I don't care about her. Yeah, but I love you, right? So we'll explain that. So clearly he's cheated before, though he will lie about it, which leads me to my next point, is that he lies on purpose to cover his tracks. I'm hoping that you can start seeing some signs of narcissism here, right? Which is another issue, is that to him, it's like rules don't apply to him in an odd sense. It's like he has all of these rules about how women should act around him, how women should act in his relationship, but then these rules don't apply to him. So for example, he'll set a rule to his woman that she can't go clubbing, she can't go out with her female friends, okay? She can't go on a trip with her female friends. But then himself, he's allowed to go on the trip with his boys. He's allowed to travel around. He's allowed to go clubbing and, sleep with a bunch of other girls. So you can see how the rules that he tells other people to follow, he doesn't follow himself. He has this superiority complex, this sort of sense of entitlement on top of that, which is another sign of narcissism. And he really tries to hide his flaws. And as he says in one of his interviews, he says, I never make mistakes. When the interviewer asks him, hey, well, what if you make a mistake, or what, like, you do something wrong and you say you never apologize, and he says he never apologizes because he never makes mistakes, which obviously is not true. Every human makes mistakes. It's impossible not to make mistakes in your life. He has this very materialistic and immature sense of what masculinity is, similar to a frat boy in college. I would describe his idea of masculinity and his sort of materialism around masculinity to be really no further than college level or high school level. Seems like he hasn't graduated from having a more sort of inclusive concept of what it means to be a man, and to him it's just getting a bunch of girls, getting money, and getting fame. Another issue is that most of his claims are not scientific, they're not objective, they're mostly anecdotal from his own experiences. My guess is that he mostly attracts women with lower self-esteem. Therefore, he projects that all women are like that. He's going to project that onto the world and say that, all women are like this, all women are like that. And it's really an overgeneralization, which, is a cognitive bias in cognitive therapy, is when you overgeneralize, you take a single instance and you overgeneralize it to every single instance in the world, which clearly isn't the case. Some women with high self-esteem will not respond to his philosophies, his theories, will not respond to what he says. And a dangerous thing that he does is that he will use semantics, he will play with the definition of words and twist those definitions to his own liking to serve his purposes. So for example, in interviews, he'll talk about how controlling he is with a woman. He doesn't want her to get out of the house and socialize because she wouldn't want her to get hit on and all of that, right? And so I'm really sort of summarizing here. But then what he'll explain is that he'll explain that I'm not insecure, I'm just a very territorial man. So now he justifies that it's not insecurity, but in fact it's just him being territorial, which is, in my opinion, just another word for being someone who's very controlling and very sort of power hungry in a sense. You want to get as much land as you can in a metaphorical sense. So that's just a play with words to justify your insecurity. The problem, one of the biggest problems with Andrew Tate is that he encourages men to repress their emotions, right? And that sort of has an impact on the collective unconscious, where now every single man in the world that follows Andrew Tate will believe that their emotions are not valid. And we all know in psychology and all that repression of emotions and of pathologies will lead to maladaptive behaviors and just not a good psychological development in the child or in the person growing up. So repression is not the answer. And this is a projection of his lack of self-awareness as it pertains to his own emotional world. So for example, in one of the interviews, he's sort of shouting loud and, because he's being frustrated and irritated with the questions. And then the woman will ask him, well, why are you shouting? And then he just makes a joke about it. It's for the mic, so the mic can hear me. This is important. A lot of narcissists, they don't really are aware of how they're coming off. They're not really aware that the way that they portray themselves, the way that they shout, is actually impacting the other person. They're not really aware of this phenomena. So this is also a sign of lack of emotional intelligence. So his whole argument is that men who are trying to promote that it's okay for men to cry or to express their emotions only want to bring them to their level of mediocrity. Well, let me counter that by saying that emotions, in fact, are not a sign of negativity, it's not a sign of being inferior. In fact, it's not a sign of anything. Emotions are only energy in a sense. It's only a display of your internal state, and your internal state is changeable. Now, to judge a certain internal state or a manifestation of that internal state as bad and as being inferior, I think it's bad. The goal of the emotion is to lead you towards overcoming it and to lead you towards somewhere better. So if you cry, if you're angry, if you're sad, that's not a negative thing per se. It's only negative if you don't do anything with it, right? And now all he's saying is that you got to repress that. You just sort of put your head down and work, which isn't the healthiest of ways. A more integrative, holistic approach to that would be, okay, you feel sad, you feel angry, maybe you cry, and that's okay. You cry and you move on. But he says, don't even cry and move on, which is skipping the first step. If you are skipping that step, then you are leading towards repression, which again, as I've said, is not the answer. And his idea that, to bring other men to your mediocre level with you by crying, he is sort of projecting his own emotional manipulation in a sense. He's projecting that other men are using this to manipulate other men to be mediocre with them. Whereas the truth that people who encourage men to be more expressive and more sort of in touch with their emotions, they're actually coming from a good place. They're not coming from a negative place. So how is Andrew Tate influencing men in the wrong direction? How is he impacting masculinity as we know it now? Well, the first thing is his concept of value. His concept of value for men is incredibly materialistic. In fact, it is only materialistic. His concept of value for men is based on money, status, and women. That's pretty much it. And success, right? For example, on Standout TV, when he explains, his sort of sense of value, he explains that he's a man that's very successful, has a lot of women, has a car, has a house. He mentions really the crude materialistic things that make him a man. He doesn't regard anything that has to do with values. For example, courage, freedom, creativity, expression, purpose. He doesn't appeal to values. In fact, he only appeals to what's material. And how he impacts men in a negative way is that he disguises his lack of integrity as actually being something like being a man with strong boundaries. For example, he has no integrity in the sense that he will cheat on his women, but his women will not be allowed to speak with other men, for example. Lying, deceiving and all that, this lack of integrity as a man, he disguises that as him having strong boundaries and him, being in control, being the man who, decides everything in a sense. And when you're using boundaries, not in a 50-50 way, not in a way that is equal and that is inclusive of the other person, but use boundaries to only serve your own egocentric, selfish needs, then it's not a healthy manifestation of boundaries. In fact, there's nothing good about that. If you're using boundaries to manipulate others, those boundaries only serve to hurt, and you're inspiring a bunch of men to do the same and to propagate more evil and more hurt in the world. And say whatever you want about Andrew Tate. If you say that some of the universal principles he welcomes and he describes are true, and that can help men, okay, maybe, but actions will always speak louder than words. He only used words as a smokescreen to disguise all that he is doing in reality, and that isn't a way to follow a man. You can't follow a man just because of his words. Judge a man by his actions, not his words. Which leads me to another point where Andrew Tate objectifies women and he encourages unconsciously other men to do the same. So in his interviews, he'll compare a woman to a car or a Lamborghini. He says that a woman is his own property and that, he wouldn't park his Lamborghini in a dark alleyway and, get robbed and all that and whatever, even if his Lamborghini has the best lock. That's what he describes. And this analogy as women as an object of property is a huge issue here. Now this next point is probably going to anger some of you who maybe really like Andrew Tate or believe in his views or think that he's some of what he says is good. Well, Andrew Tate is in fact nothing but a baby in a grown man's body. Now, if that sounds shocking, I'm not trying to say that to insult him or attack him, because in fact, every narcissist pretty much has this issue where they can't differentiate themselves from the external world. In fact, they haven't reached this stage of development where they can differentiate from what another person wants and what they want. Therefore, they project their needs on that other person, or they project that everyone wants what he wants, right? Which leads me to longer stages of ego development, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but there are many stages, right? So when you begin, you're sort of this infant at this sort of pre-verbal stage, you could call it. At the stage number 2, that's called the impulsive stage. Let me read you the definition of what it is and tell me if this relates to Andrew Tate or not, okay? Now this stage, usually the impulsive stage is around age 2 to 5, something like that, and it describes it as follows. The child asserts his growing sense of self and views the world in egocentric terms. The child is preoccupied by bodily impulses, particularly, age appropriate here, sexual and aggressive wants. Immersed in the moment, they view the world solely in terms of how things affect him or her. As I've explained, when someone meets the child's needs, they are considered good, and if they do not, they are considered bad, often resulting in impulsive retaliation, such as running away or running home. Alright, so for example, When Andrew Tate, if a woman, does something he doesn't like, he's going to criticize her. He's going to tell her, get away from my house. If whatever. He doesn't do that for the best of the woman. He doesn't do that to help the woman. He only does that because she no longer serves his own selfish needs, if that makes sense. Discipline is viewed by the child as restraint. Rewards and punishments are seen as nice to me or mean to me, right? Pretty much. The child's needs and feelings are experienced mostly in bodily modes. And the child's orientation at this stage is almost exclusively to the present rather than the past and the future. As you can see with all this it says in this stage, it's called the impulsive stage, where Andrew Tate, he will cheat on his woman if he has the impulse to do so. He's going to do something stupid if he has the impulse to do so, and he's going to rationalize after that, using his grand principles and why it was okay, while in fact was just following his sexual impulses and being a fucking animal. So here's why Andrew Tate is stuck at this lower developmental level. First, he hasn't developed differentiation, where he sees everything as an extension of himself or an extension of his needs. So he can't realize that the other person he's speaking to is actually another autonomous being with his own feelings, his own his own worldviews, his own needs. And instead, he's going to just project onto that person what he wants. He also hasn't developed self-awareness, which justifies why he's stuck at this lower stage. He's not aware of the fact that he has certain flaws when he says that he never makes mistakes. He never makes mistakes, right? And he believes that he's this totally independent person that, has value intrinsically as a man. But in fact, he is nothing without women. Without women, he's worth absolutely nothing. And because his sense of value is derived off of women, how could you say that he is independent? In fact, I would say that he is not. And this sort of lack of self-awareness, he doesn't feel that way, right? He doesn't realize that he would be absolutely nothing without women, without money, without all of these superficial things. Therefore, he's not self-aware. Another reason why he's stuck at this lower level of development is because he hasn't developed any sense of guilt or any sense of self-reflection upon his own actions. So his moral compass is very selfish, right? He doesn't feel guilt for when he cheats on a woman or when he blatantly lies on camera to the world. He doesn't feel any guilt. And what might seem to you like confidence and believing in yourself and being, this really confident person, in fact, is nothing more than a lack of nuanced thinking and a lack of ability to think in complex and more nuanced terms. In fact, you'll see in a lot of his videos and all of his interviews, he thinks in really black and white terms. He says, men are like this, women are like that, there's nothing you can say to disprove me. And because he's not open to criticism, it only exacerbates his cause. Now, you might argue with me, be like, well, he's not a baby, clearly, because, he's intelligent. He knows all of these things. He's articulate. He's charismatic. Okay, yes. So you can develop independence. You can develop sort of intelligence and all that. You can learn a bunch of facts. You can learn a bunch of things at school, or you can even learn to think for yourself, which he has largely done, yes. But your developmental stage as a human is not just intellectual. It's also emotional and relational, which I feel like he is greatly lacking. So the fact that maybe he's intelligent, he learns how to manipulate others and all that, it's deeply founded on egocentric, selfish values and what you could call stage red, as in spiral dynamics. You can look it up. Basically, he's at a stage now where everything that he does is for himself. And because it is so, then no amount of intelligence will justify that maybe he's awakened or something, which isn't the case. For example, the mafia boss is, greatest criminal, whatever, in the country. He's very smart, he knows a lot about the market, he knows about his competitors, he knows about his enemies, and he's a master manipulator. Does that mean you should listen to him and take him as a role model for your life? Hell no. So you can be smart, you can have some street smarts as to how to navigate the field, how to get your way, manipulate yourself through interviews and through connections to reach success or whatever you want for that matter. That doesn't justify that the actions were morally good. Now let's talk about women and game, seduction, and how his principles apply to this whole thing, because you probably are interested in that if you follow my channel. Does his techniques, does his philosophy, does it work on women, yes or no? The answer is, of course it works. It works, but I think it only works to a specific demographic of women, especially women with no boundaries or very little boundaries, or women with lower self-esteem. And because there are millions and billions of women who struggle with low self-esteem and would tolerate a man, like that, because they don't know any better, then of course, just from the get-go, he can be successful with millions of women across the globe. In fact, because high self-esteem women are more rare, actually, his techniques appeal with a greater and a bigger range, a greater demographic of women by default. Also, women with lower self-esteem are, as a general trend, easier to sleep with. Therefore, he uses these techniques, his philosophy on that, to get more women, for example. And it just ends up working in his favor. His stuff works on women who are maybe more power hungry or are more materialistic, so maybe they really want his success or his money, so they'll hang around him to get more of this success and money. Does that mean that you should do it because it works? No, because if you do that, you're going to be miserable, you're going to be only headed towards the materialistic means. And you know what, if you want to do it, I can't stop you. If you want to be this selfish asshole, narcissistic, and you think it's going to get you a woman, try it out. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to make you happy. In fact, you're going to feel worse about it, unless you're a sociopath and you don't give a shit. And if you were a sociopath, probably you wouldn't be watching this video. For the high self-esteem woman, I can guarantee you that no woman who has decent self-esteem, high self-esteem, would tolerate any of his fucking bullshit. In fact, they wouldn't even tolerate 1% of his controlling, power-hungry behaviors. So to these women, he probably has not a single chance. So his game, seduction, style of seduction, isn't for everyone. It fits him and his lifestyle, and he probably doesn't care about the woman in a sort of qualitative level. All he cares about is she hot? Is she, probably because he's very materialistic, that's probably the only thing he cares about. Also the fame and the sort of reputation that he could get from associating with that woman. So it works for him. But this sort of game, it doesn't work for everyone. For example, my sort of whatever game you want to call it, is just being myself, being incredibly true, and using honesty as this sort of display of value, this display of confidence. I use honesty. This is sort of my tool towards confidence. I'm very vulnerable, I'm very sort of true, so that's sort of my style of game seduction, as you call it, and it works really well for me. I wouldn't think that this sort of game would work with everyone. So you have to find your own style. Don't just emulate some random famous, TikToker, Twitter, whatever, influencer because, they've had success. Find your own style. Now, let's talk about masculinity as a whole. And let me present to you a new worldview, a new idea of what masculinity should be beyond Andrew Tate's views. We need a more holistic, more inclusive concept of masculinity, and not a sort of regressive, materialistic, reductionistic, crude form of masculinity that Andrew Tate is explaining. Because Andrew Tate's views are materialistic and reductionistic and really egocentric, we need to move on from egocentricity to universe centricity, in a sense. So from egocentric to world centric to universe centric. So if that sounds like a bunch of random words, let me explain. So first, instead of seeing a woman as only a means to an end, woman as the only purpose for women is to fulfill your selfish needs, that would be egocentric. You see a woman as a cosmic being in the universe, here to help you fulfill your destiny as a man. So that's more sort of a universal, sort of spiritual way of seeing things. Now, you don't have to be spiritual. At least evolve from seeing a woman as just a being to follow, to fulfill your sexual needs, to being someone who you can live together and help grow, and she helps you grow in a sort of interdependent manner instead of a selfish manner. A way you could see this, graduating from egocentric, independent to interdependent, is that every king needs a queen, right? On the chessboard, or in real life, right? The king wants to fulfill his purpose, lead his kingdom to victory in the war, whatever. And the queen plays a crucial role supporting the king into his own self-actualization, right? So that's sort of the idea of interdependence, that the king, yes, maybe he could rule the kingdom by himself, but he wouldn't be the same without his queen, right? And vice versa. The queen, yes, maybe she could live on her own or do whatever thing, but without the king, she won't achieve, without the king, I don't believe that she will achieve her full potential. Vice versa for the king. Personally, yes, okay, some men, they want to go their own way, and they achieve their purpose on their own. But I believe that if you had your queen with you, you'd probably achieve twice as more, 10 times as more, just because of the synergy. You find the right partner and you can synergistically grow as a person, instead of just leeching off, sexual needs and all that, or, validation or fame or money, whatever. You synergize together to create something greater together. Which leads me to the next point, that truly masculine man should also be humble, right? Humility is something that Andrew Tate does not have. In fact, because of this lack of humility, I believe that his confidence isn't actual. His confidence is over-exaggerated and is just piled on with a bunch of stories or whatever anecdotal evidence he has. This causes a problem, because a true man does not have to state that he is a man. Someone who is truly confident does not have to boast around and show how confident they are. In fact, boasting around and trying to show everyone that you're confident is in fact a sign of a lack of confidence. You go in the playground and you see bullies picking on the kid, but the kid knows karate. He's really good in karate. He knows how to fight. Yes, maybe he's a bit smaller than the bullies, but he could get away with, kicking them and punching them in the face, and he'd probably win the fight. The karate kid is very humble. He doesn't show off really much, but the bullies are super loud, and you're trying to sort of intimidate the kid because they think they could get away with it. Who is the true man? Obviously the karate kid, because he is confident. He is competent in his abilities. He is so confident he doesn't have to boast around and pick on other kids to show that he's superior. Whereas the bullies is clearly a sort of really juvenile form of masculinity, where it's not truly being masculine. In fact, it's just being insecure and being fucking pussies, for a lack of a better term. So who's truly confident? Andrew Tate, the guy who just boasts around about how much success he has, how he's rich, and how no woman can, rival him in success, or the guy who just on his path, confident about himself, doesn't need to show off. He's clear on his path. He knows his boundaries. He's respectable of women, but he doesn't let women step on top of him. The guy who knows clearly who he is, who knows his values, knows his friends, knows his purpose. To me, the second type of man is the true confident man, the true masculine man, not the Andrew Tates out there. For a more holistic and new sense of masculinity to emerge, we need men to overcome the sort of crude materialistic levels of masculinity that Andrew Tate promotes, and go towards a more transrational, translogic form of masculinity that encompasses not only material success, but also emotional, spiritual, psychological actualization, self-actualization, and achieving of your purpose in life. To become this man who knows how to listen to their gut, to their emotions, and their logic all at once. Not only that, but know when to transcend them. For this new form of masculinity to emerge, we need to move away from simply independence to interdependence. Now, Andrew Tate has this idea that, being this independent man, this strong man with these values, yes, okay, values, as you call them, but also to understand interdependence, that you're able to have the humility that you need other people to survive, and that's okay. Yes, you can survive on your own, but with other people, you are even contrary to dependence, where you need the other person, and without that person you're absolutely nothing and you just want to kill yourself. You can live on your own, you can succeed on your own, but you would be better off with others, and you are humble enough to understand that and be inclusive of that. Which leads me to having a sense of purpose in your life as a man, and also striving towards integration instead of separation. Now, what Andrew Tate is doing is that he is drawing a divide between men and women. Instead of seeing how we can contribute, he's only encouraging men to be more selfish indirectly. He's encouraging men to be more selfish, more self-centered. Therefore, it's leading humanity towards separation instead of integration and understanding of each other. Men should be men enough to be courageous enough to be vulnerable on the battlefield, instead of just boasting about how macho and manly you are like Andrew Tate would do. In fact, a true definition of being a man is being courageous, being so vulnerable out there on the battlefield that you could get shot, you could get hit, you could get killed even, but you still have the courage to do so. Now, the mistake is to simply take that as only take courage in a form of a physical pursuit, right? As in getting more muscle or getting more girls, right? That would be the mistake, but you also want to see other areas of courage where courage applies, for example, in emotional mastery, in connecting with someone else, in being vulnerable emotionally. That also takes courage, and you're getting out there, you're exposing yourself, risking rejection, and you don't care. That's a real man. Someone who just goes out there, be willing to risk their lives to achieve their purpose, achieve their goal, achieve their business, being able to being ridiculed by others and not caring and continuing anyways. Now, have you heard enough shit about Andrew Tate, all the negatives about him, and it really sounds like I'm bashing on him, doesn't it? Well, I kind of am, and I don't really give a shit in a sense, because he is leading men to a negative path, mostly speaking. But there are also some positive things I want to point out about him, so you don't really disregard him entirely and think that I'm just some sort of asshole that I think that he's a piece of shit. Well, unfortunately, as a general trend, he is leading men in the wrong path, which is why we got to stop him. But here are some positive things about him. First, some of the general principles that he teaches, some of them are actually true. If you listen, if you cut away the last part where he justifies all his devilry and all that, yes, it's actually true. Usually in a healthy relationship, there will be one leader and that will take more of the charge. Usually it's the men. Yes, okay, that's kind of true. I don't really have examples in front of me, but sometimes he'll talk about how, being a man is about like having your values, being sort of having strong boundaries and, wanting to protect your woman, stuff like that, and being protective of your woman. Yes, that's very good. But unfortunately, because his principles are too general, it's hard to apply to specifics. And when you see that those general principles that he says, if you apply them in the wrong way, then you end up like Andrew Tate, which is, as I've said, actions speak louder than words. Another good thing about Andrew Tate is that he encourages men to stand up for themselves, be bold, and, stand out and say what they think. Which maybe in a sense is good. Unfortunately, the things that he says are questionable, but maybe the overall energy that he projects is maybe refreshing. Especially coming from a culture of feminism and being, the gender roles being very washed down and sort of equalized. Now he's ingesting more polarity into the mix, which is maybe a good thing for society. Maybe we needed him in a sense to strike the balance between, extreme feminism and extreme menism, or whatever you want to call it. So maybe he was the person we needed to change this around in a sense. And maybe the number one good thing that he brings, is that he brings red pill, the concept of red pill and the manosphere to the general public. Now, whether this is good or bad, I don't know. But the fact that he's shining light on certain issues that men have, bringing those issues into the public, and so that other people understand these issues that certain men have, might be good. Now the issue is how he addresses these red pill truths. and he addresses these truths in his own selfish ways. Which, again, as I've said this entire video, is not the right way to go. You want to address these red pill truths in your own way, in your own masculine way, based on your own personal values, not his. So in conclusion about Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is not trying to be a bad guy. He's not trying to lead masculinity the wrong path. He's not trying to be, to be this evil person. He's really only pursuing his own selfish needs. His selfish needs for power, money, fame, success, and women, right? That's his goals. But unfortunately, by doing that and being so loud about it, he is indirectly, unconsciously affecting a new generation of men and leading them the wrong path if those men decide to blindly follow him. So my answer to this problem is this. Don't base your own sense of who a man is supposed to be, your own sense of masculinity, on whatever some stupid, loud-ass person, influencer told you on YouTube or whatever, okay? Andrew Tate in that case. Don't base your sense of masculinity on that. Create your own sense of masculinity. Create your own sense of who you are and who you want to become. Discover who you are and what you want. And if you need help with discovering who you are, if you feel lost in your life, not exactly sure where you want to go, you can book a free consultation call with me, link in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this next video here about developing high self-esteem. So you want to know what high self-esteem is and not fall for the bullshit that's being thrown out there in the internet on how to be confident as a man. Watch this video, so I'll see you there.